Hey everybody, welcome to Throwback Thursday GMG review. This has been a long time coming, but we're taking it back 27 years to possibly the greatest two-player starter set made by Games Workshop. This is a template, if you will, for what would come later, and probably the biggest change in Warhammer games up until its release. So this is 1998's Warhammer 40,000, 3rd edition. This was actually still the two-player starter set when I started working for Games Workshop in roughly 2000. And yeah, and contained pretty much everything you need to play the game. What I would say is probably the benchmark for great Warhammer 40k rulebooks up until now. Now, it's often imitated, never duplicated. There is a two-player ultimate starter set right now for Warhammer 40,000 10th edition, and I thought it'd be useful to do a side-by-side. You can see the component quality, obviously, massively improved. But for its time, this revolutionized several things. One, it was a box set that came with plastic terrain, hard plastic terrain. You got some ruins here. You got some barrels, the classic jungle tree, and some tank traps. You got what were at the time the nicest plastic Space Marines ever produced. They set a standard basically for how Games Workshop kits were going to be for roughly the next 20 years. This was a time that ushered in the sort of compatible and posable and interchangeable units design that plastic Games Workshop figures became known for basically across the industry. And it created an entirely new race for Warhammer 40k, the Dark Eldar, but did not include the miniatures in the back of this box. In fact, one of the jokes of this edition is that all of the Dark Eldar pictured here are actually rapid prototype medals, as is parts of the Space Marines too. For instance, those hands are actually 2nd edition plastic hands. That's a 2nd edition plastic backpack on his back. And because very often the painting and the photography had to be done long before the miniatures were actually finished, you saw prototypes in here instead of the actual finished products. So what's interesting is sometimes things didn't quite match. These are all, for instance, I think either metal or resin Dark Eldar warriors. And you can see they're repeated quite often here. So you can see the same guy 1, 2, 3 times. Dude with the hair 1, 2, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And then the heavy weapon guy, I think there's a single sculpt except for this guy with the alternate head, where they just chopped off the head and stuck on. It looks like either a wood elf head or maybe a dark elf head from Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And even the pilot on this land speeder, the land speeder actually isn't finished. That fairing all ends up having studs on it when the final plastic miniature is done. And that pilot is a head that does not exist in the actual frame. So just an interesting artifact of the time, what was photographed on the back. And it actually says, for that reason, contents and components may vary from those illustrated, models supplied unpainted and unassembled, because they knew that they were doing stuff that wasn't actually included in here when they were done. So what'd you get? 10 Space Marines, a land speeder, also one of the first sort of like interchangeable plastic vehicles. This was competing with like the old plastic Rhino and Razorback. Actually, Razorback was a metal accessory. And of course, the plastic land speeder was the first of its kind. It was all metal like land speeders before that. 2 ruined buildings. It's actually 1 ruin in 2 pieces. 3 plastic weapon templates, so the classic plastic ones. They actually were in a very brittle orange plastic when they first came out, and we actually ended up exchanging a lot of them for these softer white plastic ones. Some assorted game dice. Only 7. You got 6 dice and a scatter die. 2 range rulers, 4 jungle trees, barricades, 2 card play sheets, and a 288-page rulebook. And that's what we're going to take a look at right now. Now, of course, a modern starter set, you're going to get, kind of a similar thing here, but you get a tournament captain, librarian, you get the 2 combat patrols, right? A squad of the Flamer Marines, Terminator squad, a whole bunch of Tyranids here, the Prime and all of his Termagant. And I think they're Pyrovores and the Von Ryan's Leapers as well. And I don't remember what this thing's called. It's a Psychophage, I think it is. Yeah, and the 5 Barb Guards. So, obviously a lot of component materials, 31 miniatures in here plus terrain. This one's got 20, 30, 40-ish miniatures, so about almost 50 miniatures in here. And the quality obviously has gone way up, but the posability's gone way down. All of those miniatures you can only really build one way. Now the book, I think, is the thing that makes the real difference in here. This is a game in a book. In fact, this is probably the most complete rulebook Games Workshop's made. And earlier last year, I compared this rulebook to the Fire and Jade rulebook for Warhammer Age of Sigmar Spearhead. They're very similar. It's all the core rules, all of the scenario rules, and then every army list in a single book. That's what we have here as well. By comparison, you're going to get a small core rulebook, a getting started handbook, and then just the rules for the miniatures that come in the box in the starter set for today. So go back to 98. What did you get? Well, this rulebook's an absolute banger. It starts off with 10 pages of John Blanchard, and interestingly enough, right here on the cover, we have a, I would say, iconic statement that happens for the first time. The term grim darkness gets coined as the log line for this edition of Warhammer 40,000. This is the first time this appears in text. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And that would go on to basically define a genre for the next like 25 years. Grimdark became an idea, right? This gritty, a future that is old and falling apart. I remember Alan Merritt describing Warhammer 40,000 once as a man scribbling with an electric pen in a dark cell below a huge, huge Gothic cathedral. And he's illuminated by, an anti-gravity platform with a skull sitting on top of it that has a candle burning atop. So like all of these contradictions, right? An anti-gravity platform, electric quill, but then a candle, he's in the bottom of a dungeon. It's these contradictory sort of like anachronisms and stuff. John Blanche cover, iconic Black Templar cover. Also the first time the Black Templars really appear in 40K literature. We have a real holdover here with the miniatures themselves. I'm going to try and be careful with this book because this is one of my original copies and the binding notoriously would fall apart. And obviously this has been played with a lot. Tons of second edition miniatures carried over into this edition. So you can see here we still have plastic and metal Tyranids, right? The Huggy Carnifex, metal Tyranid Warriors, one-piece plastic Termagants with a few of the special weapon gaunts in there, and metal Hormagaunts that all look like the alien from Aliens. Metal Terminators for the Chaos Space Marines, all metal with square-based Ogrins for the Imperial Guard. Again, more beautiful John Blanchard. And the game design is done by Rick Priestley, Nate Chambers, Gap Thorpe, and Pickstock, and Jervis Johnson. Editors were Lindsay Priestley, Tillian Fox, and Jake Thornton. Cover painting by John Blanche. And the illustrations are John Blanche, Alex Boyd, who is published in here for the first time, Wayne England, Dave Gallagher, Des Hanley, Neil Hodgson, Wally Kennedy, Paul Smith, John Wigley, and Rich Wright. These are all obviously just some of the most, again, and a lot of these appearing for the second or third time. They were in second edition as well. But some of this done just for this book. And like I said, the first 10 pages, it's just all John Blanche, just front to back until you get to the credits. That's all John. So from the cover, 1, 2, I don't think this is John, but we can forgive it. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pages. Nine illustrations by John himself. And again, this kind of set the tone for Warhammer 40,000. It was a lot brighter and goofier before this. And into the context. Now, this is probably, if you go wind back in time, this is probably the lightest cognitive load Warhammer 40,000 ever was. The whole game turn is basically just 3 phases: move, shoot, and assault. Morale checks would happen at the end. Characters could attach or detach from units. And vehicles had a facing-based system with armor facings to the front, side, and rear. All of that stuff was basically pioneered in here and was a massive departure from second edition Warhammer 40,000, which was effectively a bunch of erratas to Rogue Trader in the Battles book and the vehicle manual that then carried forward into 2E and all their codexes. So this, again, it's also a temporally written book. So it shows you what is a war game at the very beginning. It educates you kind of like what is a tabletop game. Here's pictures of people doing it. What are miniatures? What does an army typically look like? And I love this army because this is, I think, a 1,500 point army. And it falls into that classic of an HQ, 2 troop choices, or some troop choices, or actually only 1 troop choice here with a Rhino. We've got a elite, a fast, another fast, another elite, and I think a heavy support somewhere. No heavy supports in this one. And then Fighting Wargame, it gives you a battle report right at the front for tell, show, and have a go. So we're going to tell you what a wargame is, show you what it looks like, and then have a go. Let's read people playing a battle report. they don't, I think every rulebook could benefit from this, from doing an old school White Dwarf style battle report right at the very beginning to show you what the game looks like. How do you collect an army? Basics of painting. Again, these miniatures, not the miniatures that come in this box. This is a second edition Strike Force Marine, and then a prototype Dark Eldar in metal. And this was, we jokingly used to call this 1, 2, 3 heavy metal. Is like there was some step missing here, base coats, and then heavy metal was the end. This isn't quite as bad. It's a little more beginner friendly. How to make terrain, and then what tables might look like. And then we're right into the rules. 6-sided dice, 1 scatter dice, the template, and then the stat line. Now this stat line got rid of the movement stat, which was kind of controversial at the time, but fixed movements were a big hallmark of 3rd edition and carried forward almost all the way to the end into 7th. So dropping movement, everything was moving by class, so infantry, jump infantry, cavalry, bikes, tanks, and fast vehicles all had their own movement rates. And then you had the core stat line that looks pretty much the same as it is today, so it's not expressed in actually, it would look the same in, I guess, Necromun. No, not even then. The getting rid of the hit chart basically has changed all this around. But your weapon skill, ballistic skill, which is your chance out of 6 in hitting. So weapon skill 4 is a 3+ in today's terms. BLS skill 4 is a 3+. Weapon skill 4 is you're going to compare it to other weapon skills, which is a big departure from today. Strength and toughness. Just together in the stat line. Initiative, how fast you would move when you strike, how many attack dice you roll in melee. Leadership is your all-in-one morale stat, and then your saving throw. Now, saves in this game had an all-or-nothing type of save. Your AP would either be equal to or lower than the save, and it would just go away. But the whole course of the turn is just move, shoot, fight in close combat. And we're going to be doing a Let's Play that you can watch today to see that happen. Now, the movement phase, pretty simple. Choose unit to move up to their max movement for their class. So for instance, for infantry, if we go over to here, it's going to be 6 inches and they can assault 6 inches. Cavalry, 6 inches and assault 12. Vehicles move 12 but can't assault. Fast vehicles move 24 but can't assault. Walkers move and assault 6, just like infantry. Bikes move 12 and assault 6, and jump packs move 12 and assault 6. 2-inch coherency from at least one other model in the unit for all models. And then terrain. Would have different ideas of like what its random movement would be. So how does it slow you down? And when you move through difficult terrain, you would roll 2 dice or 3 dice or 1 dice and pick the highest result to see what your fixed movement became. Shooting, choose a target, measure range, roll to hit, roll to wound, remove casualties from anywhere you want as long as they do or don't have a save. And if you're in cover, you might get a saving throw. Lights cover like, bushes and grass would be a 6+, 5+, 4+ would be like a fortification. Check and range. Measure from nearest model in the target unit. Models in the unit that are out of range can't be hit, as described in the casualty removals later on. And then you can't measure before. You have to choose your target before you measure your range. There's no pre-measuring in this game. There's our chances to hit on the table. And then rolling to wound. Now this chart is very different from the current one. There are times you cannot wound. If the strength of an attack is less than half of that are more than, I think it's triple in this case. So if you have a 6 toughness, a 2 won't wound you, but a 3 will. And on and on. So if you hit toughness 8, basically strength 4 could no longer wound you. Saves, chance out of 6 of saving. And then we've got some lovely illustrations all through here. And then another controversial rule, instant death. If an attack was twice your toughness when it hit you, if you got wounded, you would die instantly no matter how many wounds you had. This made things like power fists. You didn't have to have a damage characteristic. If you got hit by something that's just going to vaporize you, you would just die. Otherwise, you'd shrug it off, take a wound, and keep on moving. Cover rules. Most cover was like area terrain. And then shooting. Now, this is another difference from modern editions. If you sat still, you could shoot twice with a rapid fire weapon up to the half range, which is 12, or up to your full range once. Assault weapons, you can just always fire your maximum range when you move. And firing a heavy weapon, can't shoot if you move, can if you don't. That simple. Pistols always shoot their max range. And in movement, there's no running in this either. There's no advancing, no running, you just move based on your move class. Close combat, all in initiative order. Now, being in cover would make you initiative 10, but it could be canceled out by having frag grenades equipped on the attacking unit when you charge into a unit that's in cover. And then if you're equipped with something that's a slow weapon like a power fist or a thunderhammer, you could have your initiative fixed down to 1. Everything fought in initiative bands with simultaneous combats for things that were tied from 10 down to 1. And anything that died in initiative band before it got to strike was just dead and did not fight. You get +1 attack when you charge and +1 for being armed with 2 close combat weapons. as long as they weren't, weird. And then rolling to hit was done with a compared weapon skill. So if your weapon skill was higher, you'd hit on a 3. If it was lower, typically you'd hit on a 5. So once you're at 4 and 4, you're tied. 4 versus 3 is 5. I think 5 came to when you were half the opponent's weapon skill. So if you're attacking someone who is weapon skill 4 and your weapon skill 2, you would need a 5 to hit. So high weapon skill was also a defensive bonus. Same wound chart as for shooting. And then when you lost combat, you would flee like an old Warhammer. So if you lost a fight, you would make a morale check. If you stayed, you'd pile back into combat as if you'd tied the fight. If you failed, you'd fall back 2d6, and the opponents could either chase you, also rolling 2d6 and trying to catch you, or they could consolidate, in which case they could move 3 inches in any direction. Now, when you are in a broken state, as long as you're above half, you can still try and rally, especially if you're at the board edge. It's sort of all your moves. But you would just keep fleeing and falling back. You can still shoot guns, but not heavy weapons. And you could do like a fighting withdrawal. But if stuff hits you or you get caught in a crossfire and you fell back to an enemy unit, you could just straight up die. Regrouping, if there's someone within 6, you could be escorted off the table because you wouldn't have a chance to make a morale check. And if there's at least 50% of your guys remaining, then you can rally. But if none of this stuff is true, then you just keep running away until you get to those things all being okay. This is why later on orcs got given things like a mob up roll. Characters attached to units, just like today. But they could also jump out and leave and go somewhere else. Now you can see the vehicle stat line, front, side, and rear armor, they're all 90-degree arcs. And to damage a vehicle, it didn't have wounds or any type of like hull points at this point in the edition. You would simply roll a die, add the strength of your attack. If it was equal to the armor value, you did a glancing hit. If it was greater, you did a penetrating hit. A penetrating hit would destroy the vehicle on a 4+, and on a 6, it would explode. So vehicles were relatively simple. Now they could fire multiple guns if they didn't move or didn't move very far, and fast vehicles, of course, could move further and fire a single weapon than other things could. Ordnance weapons could never move and fire, and they were considered super heavy weapons. And they were the only templates that could scatter. A blast template from a missile launcher, if you missed, just wouldn't land, but a big template would still scatter the amount that you rolled on a die, and then your ordnance template. It wasn't reduced by ballistic or anything like that by this edition. And you can see here, all of the core tanks are just reprinted in here. There's our glancing, penetrating, and then ordnance weapons would do even more damage because you typically roll 2 dice and pick something higher. Vehicle could be annihilated and everyone inside killed. Different movement rates for different troops, and that's it. That's the core mechanics. So like I said, super quick. I think we're from page, what is it, 40-ish? Yeah, I think it's about page 40. Yeah, the turn structure starts. Page 40 to page 94 is the core mechanics of the game. That includes everything, including vehicles. So about 50 pages of rules. And then we're to universe stuff and the battles book. So battlefields, how to make terrain, how to set up a battlefield, how to roll your scenarios. And there are 6 core scenarios, 3 raid scenarios, and 3 battle scenarios in here. They even gave you rules for how to play on different types of worlds, like what kind of world you were playing on, generate your terrain. And you also had strategy ratings. Now that was the number of D6s you would roll to try and choose if you're the attack and defender, choose your deployment. And it basically was designed around the generalship of your faction. So Space Marines would roll 3 dice, pick the highest. Eldar, 3 dice, pick the highest. Dark Eldar, Chaos Space Marines, 2 dice, pick the highest. And everybody else was just 1 die because it's sort of the eliteness of your force. And then, oh, here it is, the standard force organization chart. I have this tattooed on the inside of my brain. 2 troops were mandatory along with a single HQ, and that was the core formation of every army. Certain later codexes and supplements might make variations where certain things counted as troop choices to make your armies look a little bit different. But then you can take another HQ and up to 4 more troop choices, 3 fast, 3 heavy, and 3 elites. And these were the core fundamental formations for every army in Warhammer 40,000. All of these scenario special rules would unlock the ability to do them in a game. So like deep striking, you couldn't do unless the scenario had the rule. Same with infiltrators, fortifications, hidden setup, night fight, obstacles, preliminary bombardment, random game length, reserve, sentry, sustained attack where units would come back to life, and then victory points. And these basically were like, instead of your army having that rule, they could have that rule, but they could only use it if the scenario was appropriate to do. So sometimes your infiltrators didn't infiltrate because it didn't make any sense because they were defending. And then cleanse, which is hold table quarters. Night fight, which is cleanse, but you can't see very far. Patrol, which has asymmetrical deployment zones. Recon, where you're trying to get to each other's half of the board. Rescue, where you're trying to get a objective off the table. And those are your 5 core ones. And then the battles, where you're playing larger missions, give you a different force org chart for the attacker and defender usually. You had Taking Hold, Meat Grinder, Bunker Assault, and these again were all asymmetrical. And then the raid missions would have sentries, little NPCs you had to try and assassinate before the alarm got raised, and they were good for smaller games. So battles were bigger games, raids were smaller games. And this would be like something you'd play a combat patrol with. And I love these missions because they're very like thematic. And then finally, breakthrough missions were usually where one side is doing like a last stand or trying to get out from somewhere. You had rules for campaigns, getting experience points right here in the core rules, battle honors for everybody. And people forget there was campaign rules in this edition. And then how to write your army list and choose your army. You can see here all the different 4-star charts for the different variations. And the last half of the book, the last 100 pages, were all of the army lists. They basically transcribed and took the codexes from 2nd edition and gave you most of your current unit options. There's no special characters in here, but you just use them as generic heroes at the time. So the Marines obviously got all their main greatest hits, command squads and characters. Troop choices, you had scouts and tactical squads, you had veteran squads, command squads, assault squads, bike squads, land speeders, land speeder tornadoes, which were a new kind, the attack bike, devastators, whirlwinds, annihilators and destructors, land raiders, dreads, and vindicators. The Dark Eldar, who showed up for the first time with their lord and retinue, homunculi and mandrakes. The Tyranid hive fleets, which got most of their greatest hits, so lictors, warriors, hive tyrants. There was no patriarch though. Gene stealers, termagants and ripper swarms, spore mines and hormagaunts, gargoyles, carnifexes and zoanthropes. That would be most of the 2nd edition stuff in Biowars. The Eldar, with the Avatar or a Phoenix Lord, which you would make one of the different ones, the different shrines. Farseers and Warp Spiders, Striking Scorpions and Banshees. Fire Dragons, you can see the Wraith Guard. Still with super high strength and toughness. But then the only non-vehicle walker in here was notorious for this edition, and that was the Wraith Lord, because he was strength 10. Now, he became toughness 8 in the Eldar Codex, and that was crazy. You had decans too that were strength D later on, but they were just strength 10, I think, in this book. And then finally, we had some of the color section stuff. And you see here, they're still using mostly 2nd edition photos and miniatures, some of which went back to Rogue Trader. Gorka Morka stuff for the orcs for a lot of it. Chaos Space Marines, when demon units become available and get summoned, and they put all the greater demons and demon princes and stuff right in here. The Khorne Berserkers were one of the only other multi-part plastic kits that came out at the end of 2nd edition. The Guard, with all their various tanks, which had just come out, the Chimeras and the Hellhounds and Leman Russ. The Orcs, who did not get a Weird Boy, which was a problem for them because that was available in the last edition. I mean, they didn't have any Psychers. But you had a Warboss, Storm Boys, Commandos, and Ard Boys. Scar Boys and Slugga Boys, Stick Bombers and Shooter Boys. Gretchen and his troops had lots of troop choices. But they didn't get the Choppa until the Codex came out, and they were a bit undergunned until that point. Sisters, who had just gotten a Codex at the end of 2nd edition, still had an army list in here. And then here's the Imperium. So you could take your Inquisitors, Missionaries, Confessors, Preachers, and Assassins to hang out with those squads. And then it was an appendix. All kinds of interesting notes, stuff for a quick ref. And that was the book in the box. So, man, oh man, have I had fun basically putting together a complete copy of this. And today you can watch a demo where Bob and I run through this. And the next couple weeks, we're going to have a battle report of all of the core missions, all 5 core missions from Warhammer 40,000. I'm currently working on my Dark Eldar as my army through the ages of Flesh Terrors has already got a land speeder and a tactical squad added to it. I'm going to paint a scout squad, a new captain, new chaplain, a couple other things to go with, some Death Company just to zhuzh it up and take it into the new edition, as well as a Furioso Dreadnought. And we'll roll in the codexes and the new armies as we go. So I'm going to try and get the Dark Eldar done and the remaining Flesh Terrors done, and we'll get all 5 of these missions filmed before we move on to another edition. So there it is, a GMG review of probably my favorite box set. Although I don't know if this is the ultimate edition of the game. I might reserve my love for that for 4th edition 40K. But this is the one that really changed it all. And I think, tell me in the comments if this is your most iconic version of 40K. So there it is, another GMG Throwback Thursday review. Big thanks for watching. Go watch the Let's Play. Throw it a mash.